Alex, is the Job Guide 360 interview guide worth it?
Honestly, yes, the guide is highly insightful. I recommend it to everyone.
Welcome to the deep dive. If you're trying to get your head around a really complex, high-stakes field like, say, modern risk management, you don't actually need to wade through every single textbook. There's a shortcut. And that shortcut is looking closely at what employers are actually testing for when they hire their expert risk analysts.
That's exactly right.
Those interview questions, they're like a perfect diagnostic map of the entire industry. They really show you what matters.
Absolutely. The questions, they're basically a distillation of what the industry needs right now. And they show not just the technical stuff, the computational skills, but also the strategic judgment that's required.
Right.
If you can confidently handle those scenarios they throw at you, you're not just prepped for an interview, you actually grasp the shifting landscape of risk, everything from black swans to regulatory changes.
Okay, so our mission today is simple. We're doing a deep dive into an expert guide on these risk analyst interview questions. We want to pull out the core skills, the technical demands, and maybe most importantly, the future trends that are really driving hiring in this field.
Makes sense.
And we've broken this down into three main areas: the technical depth, the critical thinking side, and strategic foresight. So let's start with the basics, the quantitative groundwork. Let's jump into that technical core.
Okay, well, the foundation, it's obviously data handling. I mean, a risk analyst is pretty much useless if they can't manage these complex, often huge data sets.
Yeah.
And crucially, translate that data into insights that are, practical, actionable for the people making decisions. It's extracting the meaning that really counts.
And the sources we looked at are very clear that this still needs a strong foundation in the fundamental tools. You got to be good with SQL, with Excel, especially for those essential first steps. Cleaning the data, structuring it.
Right, the basics.
But that's just setting the stage right. The real expertise comes in the application. Using something like, say, correlation analysis to spot patterns that aren't immediately obvious.
Precisely. So, if we're looking at credit risk, you might be correlating anonymized customer transaction data against external factors. Things like regional employment figures, maybe housing market trends. That correlation work is what turns a big spreadsheet into a potential early warning system.
Okay, so you've got the data structured. How do you actually quantify the uncertainty? Because risk is all about uncertainty. We're moving beyond simple averages here, aren't we? What are the sort of mathematical heavy hitters you need?
Yeah, you absolutely have to quantify that uncertainty. And that brings us to the methodologies you just have to know. When you're in these interviews, expect to talk about Monte Carlo simulations. The reason they're so critical is they don't just give you one single potential downside figure like value at risk might. No, they run thousands, maybe millions of scenarios. They model outcomes across lots of complex variables.
So it gives you a much richer picture.
Exactly. A full probability distribution of potential losses, or gains for that matter.
That distinction feels really important for listeners. It takes risk assessment from being like a single number, a static estimate, to a dynamic range of what could actually happen.
That's it. And you pair that with sensitivity analysis. That's where you test how changing just one variable, maybe interest rates, maybe the cost of a key raw material, how that ripples through and changes the whole risk profile.
And statistically, what's underpinning that?
Well, statistically, you're often using regression analysis to figure out which factors are genuinely driving the risk. You're using probability distributions to model how likely specific events are. And honestly, even basic descriptive statistics are vital for summarizing data quickly, highlighting those anomalies that just sort of jump out and say, hey, look closer here.
Got it. And to run all this complex analysis, you need the right software, the right tools. The sources mention a pretty specialized stack that goes way beyond just standard office software.
Oh, yeah. Technical skill with these industry tools is non-negotiable. We're talking about platforms like RiskWatch or maybe Palisades at Risk for detailed quantification, simulation.
Right.
You also need proficiency in higher-level statistical languages. Think SAS or R. They're built to handle massive data sets and the complex models we need.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting, looking forward, is the expectation that analysts can adapt quickly to new tools, especially things like Power BI.
Wait, Power BI, I usually think of that for business intelligence, data visualization, dashboards. Why is that suddenly so crucial for a dedicated risk analyst?
Because risk analysis is kind of pointless if the findings don't get communicated effectively, right?
Sure.
Using tools like Power BI lets analysts build dynamic dashboards, visualizations that are easy to grasp. You move away from these dense, static 20-page reports nobody reads towards real-time visuals that executives can understand almost instantly. Risk reporting has to be dynamic, adaptable, and easily shared.
That makes perfect sense. And that ability to communicate effectively, it leads us right out of the purely technical what and into the analytical how, what we're calling the critical thinking crucible. This is where an analyst really shows their value, especially when the data isn't clean, maybe it's ambiguous, or even conflicting.
Oh, absolutely. Interviewers definitely push on this. They test your intellectual rigor. So imagine you get two internal reports, right? And they give conflicting views on the same market risk. What do you do?
Yeah, what do you do?
The methodical approach is key. First, you verify the data sources for both reports. Check the methodologies they used. Then try to find additional data to clarify things. And this is important. Talk to colleagues, get different perspectives. You have to rigorously cross-check everything.
Okay, but help me with the tension here. If you're constantly seeking more data, validating every point, talking to everyone, doesn't that risk analysis paralysis?
Yep.
Where you spend so long analyzing that you miss the window to actually do something.
That's a really critical point. The goal isn't always consensus, right? The goal is informed, timely action.
Okay.
If the data stays contradictory, even after you've checked, the risk analyst's job becomes defining the boundaries of that conflict, quantify the potential loss under both scenarios, and then present a recommendation, usually based on minimizing the maximum possible damage. You manage the ambiguity. You don't pretend you can always eliminate it.
I see. That definitely separates a good analyst from a great one. But what if the issue isn't conflicting data, but just a lack of quantitative data altogether? Like maybe you're entering a totally new market or dealing with some unprecedented event.
That's when you pivot. You have to shift to a more qualitative, more collaborative approach. You start relying heavily on insights from subject matter experts, the people who actually know the area, maybe people on the ground.
Right.
You look at historical cases, even if they're not a perfect match, and then you use scenario analysis. You basically define a worst case, most likely, and best case outcome based on these qualitative inputs, these expert opinions.
So you're essentially building a model, but it's based on expertise and narrative, not just hard numbers.
Exactly. And this allows you to estimate a potential risk range, even without dense quantitative data. Then you can immediately work with stakeholders to put in cautious, timely controls or mitigation steps. You learn to function effectively even when uncertainty is really high by focusing on being flexible and putting controls in place.
Now, to make this idea of meticulous review really concrete, the guide we looked at had a great little story about finding a hidden risk. And it wasn't through some super complex simulation, it was just through sheer diligence.
Yeah, that anecdote is perfect because it shows that technical skill isn't everything if you don't have curiosity, right? So this analyst, they weren't running some complex Monte Carlo model. They were just noticing subtle little irregularities in routine expense reports. Transactions that were just slightly higher than usual for one particular vendor. Nothing dramatic. But by digging into the details, cross-referencing supplier names, looking at billing frequency, they uncovered a systemic, recurring billing error, a small thing repeated many times.
And the result of just noticing that small detail?
Well, finding it proactively didn't just recover the money lost immediately. It led to a permanent change in the verification process. It stopped potentially massive financial leakage over the long term.
Wow.
It just goes to show hidden risk isn't always lurking in some complex financial derivative. Sometimes it's right there in plain sight, just waiting for someone rigorous enough to connect the seemingly boring dots.
That focus on impact, it leads us nicely into our third section.
Yeah.
Strategic foresight and organizational impact. We've kind of established the analyst isn't just a number cruncher, but how deeply does this role really weave into the organization's overall strategy?
Oh, it's completely strategic, or at least it should be. Risk management's job is to highlight the uncertainties that directly threaten the organization's goals, whether that's profit, growth, reputation, whatever.
So give us an example.
Okay, say a company plans a major expansion into a new country. The risk assessment directly influences how they allocate resources. Do they need to spend more upfront on insurance, on local legal advice? Or can they push harder on market penetration speed? Risk analysis informs those big strategic choices.
And a huge piece of that strategic picture now is the constantly changing regulatory environment. What specific frameworks does a modern risk analyst really need to know? And, maybe more importantly, how do those rules actually change the models they build?
Yeah, fluency across several global frameworks is pretty much expected now. Take GDPR, for instance. That's not just a legal headache. It forces the analyst to model the risk of a data breach with much higher potential financial penalties.
Right, so it changes the potential impact calculation.
Exactly, which in turn demands better data protection strategies. Or in finance, you've got Basel III. This dictates capital adequacy, liquidity requirements. The analyst has to constantly adjust their mathematical models for credit risk, market risk, to make sure the company stays compliant with those solvency standards.
So the regulation isn't just a checklist item, it's actually a dynamic input variable feeding directly into the math.
Precisely. And the analyst has to be the translator here. They need to communicate the impact of these regulations clearly, quickly, to legal, to compliance, even to the operational teams who have to actually implement the changes on the ground.
This all feels like it's pushing towards a real evolution of the role itself. Looking ahead, say, 5 years. The sources suggest a pretty radical transformation is underway. What are the key trends we should be watching?
The big shift is definitely from reactive reporting, telling people what happened, to proactive prediction, trying to see what might happen.
Yep.
The future risk analyst, they're expected to blend traditional analysis with these powerful new technologies like AI and machine learning. That means moving towards real-time monitoring, predictive modeling, allowing the organization to adjust before a risk actually materializes.
Wow, that's a fundamental change in the job description, isn't it? Instead of just running a report on last quarter's financial exposure, you're helping design the algorithm that predicts next quarter's exposure.
That's exactly it. And the nature of the risks themselves is evolving fast, too. The sources really highlighted two big emerging categories. First, much more intense cybersecurity risks, partly driven by remote work and decentralized systems.
Makes sense.
And second, the growing importance of ESG risks, environmental, social, and governance factors.
ESG. That used to feel more like, corporate social responsibility reporting, soft stuff. But now it's becoming a hard financial risk factor. How does an analyst tackle that?
They have to quantify it. ESG risks things like vulnerability to climate change impacts or maybe poor labor practices in the supply chain. These are translating into real, measurable financial risks. Think regulatory fines, supply chain disruptions, reputational damage affecting sales. So the modern analyst needs to integrate ESG metrics into their long-term financial models to assess the company's resilience and even future borrowing costs.
That kind of complexity, it must demand really strong teamwork and communication skills. I mean, if you're managing a threat that touches on data security, legal policy, market strategy, and environmental factors, you can't do that alone.
Absolutely not. Collaboration is everything. And the communication piece. It has to cut through the jargon. The analyst needs to be able to explain these intricate, complex issues to people who aren't risk experts.
Like that analogy you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, the guide had a brilliant analogy for explaining cybersecurity risk to, say, a marketing team. Don't talk about firewall protocols or encryption standards, likening potential data breaches to unlocked doors that let anyone walk in that helps them instantly grasp the impact on customer trust, on safety. It makes them partners in fixing the problem.
That kind of clarity brings us neatly to our final section, the practical stuff, the essential preparation and behavioral skills. These are almost the softer skills that really underpin all that technical and strategic know-how. Let's start with prioritizing tasks. How does a top analyst manage when they're just drowning in urgent reports?
The core idea is usually assessing tasks first by urgency, then by potential impact. You have to focus immediately on those high-risk reports that directly affect decisions being made right now. Those are number one.
Okay.
You also need to show you can break down big, daunting tasks into smaller, manageable steps. And crucially, keep stakeholders in the loop about progress, or, importantly, about potential delays.
Then there's the question that always comes up in high-stakes fields. What do you do when you make a mistake?
Because everyone does, eventually.
Yeah, and the expected response is really about transparency and accountability. Own up to it immediately. Notify your supervisor. Correct the error. Maybe you missed a key data point during validation, whatever it was.
Right.
And then the crucial part, implement a fix to stop it happening again. That might mean putting in a new double check system or updating a checklist. It shows you learn from mistakes and actually strengthen the organization's processes because of it.
Okay, so for our listener who might be prepping for one of these interviews right now, What are the key research tips the source material really hammers home? Preparation needs to be pretty thorough. You need to go deep on the company's website, not just the shiny homepage. Dig into their annual reports, look for their stated goals, current challenges, their core values.
Beyond their own materials.
Yes, definitely conduct competitor analysis.
Why competitors? How does that help in a risk interview?
It shows the company you understand where they sit in the broader risk landscape. If you can identify their strengths and weaknesses compared to their rivals, you can then talk specifically about how your risk analysis skills could help them keep their edge, or maybe exploit a competitor's vulnerability.
Smart.
And finally, you can use sites like Glassdoor for insights on salary ranges or company culture, but the advice is definitely to take individual reviews with a healthy grain of salt. Use your critical thinking there too.
Good point. And wrapping up the prep, it's not just about what's in your head, but also how you present yourself physically. Professional presentation seems to be a non-negotiable.
Yeah, it's almost part of managing perceived risk, isn't it? A tidy professional appearance builds confidence. The standard, certainly in finance-related roles, remains quite formal. Think dark-colored business suit, white or light-colored dress shirt, a conservative tie, polished dress shoes.
And accessories.
Keep it minimal. Avoid flashy colors or patterns. The goal is to ensure the focus stays squarely on your skills and professionalism, not your outfit.
Okay, so we started this deep dive thinking about the risk analyst interview as a kind of map of the industry. And what we've uncovered are really two key evolving pillars. First, that technical mastery, which now demands not just calculation, but dynamic visualization and handling complex quantification.
Right.
And second, combined with that, is strategic resilience. The ability to navigate ambiguity, adapt quickly to shifting rules like Basel III, and crucially, communicate complex risks in simple terms.
And what's really striking, I think, is the direction this is all heading. Given that employers are explicitly asking for skills in AI and machine learning for predictive analysis, and they're demanding this proactive focus on complex ESG risks, the role itself is fundamentally changing.
Yeah.
So does this mean the best risk analysts in the next few years will spend less time actually, manually calculating variance and more time designing the automated systems, defining the strategic impact? It raises a big question.
Which is?
How does that changing balance between the human expert's judgment and the automated system's predictive power actually alter the nature of risk management itself for all organizations?
That is a profound question for you to think about.
Yeah.
We've tried to give you the tools and the strategic insights to help navigate this evolving world of risk. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive.